Hello and welcome to a remastered Soundlike, where today we're going to be having another look at Stockholm Syndrome. In this video I'm going to show you the sounds that I'm now using to play Stockholm Syndrome. So that it makes sense, it's going to come out after my cover of Stockholm Syndrome so that you can first hear the new version of it, and then now that I can show you what's changed. So throughout the video, every time I'm demonstrating a new section of the song, I'm going to do my best to, one, show you and describe to you the process of the new sound, and also what the old sound sounded like, and with this new sound, what's the main pedal or the main sound that you should be focusing on to recreate that sound, so that you can sound like Stockholm Syndrome. So before we get into the video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and hit the notification bell to let you know when I upload new content. Now this is the time where we'd usually go into pedal cam where I'd show you the sounds that are going on, but I feel that had previously slowed down the videos, so we're just going to get straight into it. So at the top of the song we have the riff. Now previously with my old mono rig I was using my MXR Prime Distortion for this. Fantastic pedal for an average, normal, good solid riff tone. The distortion on there is fantastic to dial in the right amount of gain. It's fantastic, and the tone control allows me to dial in a good crisp tone where needed and to roll it off if I need to kind of muffle up that tone as well. But it doesn't get the quite right amount of kind of gritty mid-tones that I get from the Big Muff for that kind of more muffled tone. So with my stereo rig, I'm now able to put those two sounds together. Now looking at the ES8 itself and how it's programmed, for the riff, on the one side, on the left side is the Big Muff, and on the right side is my Prime Distortion. Now they're being fed the same signal and then splitting off and then into the outputs and then straight into my audio interface. They're not being combined, they're staying separate. Now this allows me to get a really nice wide sound for the riff, which is really useful for the kind of like the status of the song, which is the main hook for the whole song is this riff. I kind of liken it back to what it kind of sounds like live. You want a big, nice, spread out sound, and the Boss ES8 allows me to get just the sound that I want. In terms of the qualities from both of these pedals, I get that nice, great distortion and crisp sound from the Prime Distortion, but I'm then also able to take the Big Muff and get those low mid tones in there as well. Together these two sounds sound absolutely fantastic, and I really enjoy the sound, and this is the sort of reason why I wanted to go stereo with this, because I can get such a richer, a more diverse and a varied sound from my board now that I can do this. As I said when I announced that I now had a stereo rig and when I'll be redoing all these Soundlike videos, I would be saying what is the main bulk, the main sound that you want to get, because I'm fully aware that not everyone's going to be able to get, and a Boss ES8 for example, to have two distortions on either side to get a nice kind of diverse rich sound. As it was previously in my old Soundlike, the main distortion for me that I would go for is still my Prime Distortion, good chunky solid crisp tone. The Big Muff is just there to add some extra weight in the mids. Don't think that that's the main sound. The Prime Distortion for me is the main bulk of this sound, so that's what you're going to look out for. So I've talked enough about the sound, now let's hear what it sounds like. As you can hear from that, it's a really huge tone, it's really spread out, really works fantastically well for the characteristic of the whole song. As I've said before, the main hook for this whole song is that riff, and if you're not making that riff sound as good as you can get, there's no point. So now moving on to the verse. So now for the verse. Now previously for my old sound I was just using my overdrive distortion, leaning more towards the distortion side of things but having a nice healthy amount of overdrive nonetheless. And broadly that's not changed. I still regard my overdrive distortion as the perfect pedal for any kind of like verses or chorus sounds, kind of really depends on kind of what I want to go for. But the sound itself for Stockholm Syndrome has the perfect amount of bite and aggression from it, so it's not changed, but it's still in a stereo rig. So what have I changed? What have I added? So just as a side note, when I did my whammy pedal review, there was one thing about the whammy that I never quite understood the use for, which was the detune setting. Personally, I'm still struggling where that kind of might fit in, but I found a use for it sort of with the stereo rig. It might be cheating to say I'm actually using the detune sound, but hear me out. So as you can see, if I just show you the unit, I'm taking the signal, splitting it, and on one side I've put the whammy, and the setting on the whammy is down to the detune, the kind of shallow detune setting. I'm using some MIDI to trigger that, to turn it on, but the velocity on the whammy is set to 0, so it's off. So there is kind of virtually no detune sound that you can really hear, but what it actually is doing is engaging the whammy. I don't quite get it myself, I just like the outcome I get from this. But turning on the whammy does something to the overall sound itself, and you can perceive that a lot clearer, a lot better when you have 2 channels from the original signal, which is what I'm able to do obviously with the ESA. I promise I'll stop going on about it. But turning that on helps to kind of alter the sound somehow, so it doesn't sound so flat like just one sound. And I've really grown and I've really started to like this type of sound. I can't describe what it is and how it works. It's something to do with the whammy when it's turned on, when there's signal going through it and there's current going through it and it's on and all that. But for all intents and purposes, it helps to kind of like broaden this sound out even more. So I'm using this coupled with my overdrive distortion for my verse sound, and it sounds like this. Now compared to what it sounded like previously, it's definitely sounding wider, it's not as flat. It's still the same sound, there's still just one distortion going on, but it's enhanced a little bit further by the whammy and by a feature that I previously had completely disregarded. I granted that by having the velocity turned all the way down, the effect isn't really engaged, but I've still found some use for the detune setting itself. So overall, the main sound for the verse is still my overdrive distortion. I've just had some clever trickery with this sound to kind of widen it even more, and it sounds a lot more inviting, it sounds a lot more engaging, it sounds fantastic when you're kind of playing with the sound overall. If you have a Boss ESA and if you have a whammy pedal, I would strongly suggest you start looking into this and just kind of start using this sort of sound. Or if you have a similar setup, if you have a whammy and can split the signal, I'd strongly suggest you at least give it a try just to see what's going on there. There's so much you can do with it. Whammies are great, I love a whammy. So that's the verse done, so now let's look at the pre-chorus and what's kind of going on there. So the pre-chorus, as we all know, this is just a really quick blast in the whole song. But because of the short nature of that sound, having something that's going to stand out is key. So in terms of the setup for this sound, I'm effectively going back over to my riff tone, but to add a little bit of diversity, a little bit of change in there, I'm swapping the sides that those pedals are on. For anyone who knows the Boss ESA, you are able to change the order of your effects. You can put your distortion in front of a reverb, for example, or you can put a reverb before all of that. It will sound horrible, but you can change the order of your pedals. So I'm able to take my big muff from one side and stick it on the other, and the prime distortion, stick it on the other side. So that's effectively what I've done for the pre-chorus. It's the same tone as the riff, just flips over. Exactly the same reasons as to why I've used the prime distortion and the big muff for the riff itself. They both have qualities that I find really appealing for this type of sound. The prime distortion for a big, good solid distortion sound, and then the big muff for a nice chunky, gritty mid-tone. Putting them together sounds amazing, and because they're on the spread out in the stereo field, it sounds a lot more encapsulated and a lot more engaging, a lot more punchy. It's really nothing crazy for the pre-chorus, but I think the sound really works overall. And so to demo that sound, here it is. So now it's time for the chorus of Stockholm Syndrome, and now this might be the biggest change sound-wise I've implemented since getting my stereo rig. Now I'm going to walk you through exactly what's going on. So at the start, the signal is being split. Now the left side is taking the blues drive pedal, which is turned all the way up to give a nice kind of crunchy tone. That's it for the left side. But the right hand side is taking the overdrive distortion, some whammy, and some phase. Now the order of these effects is the overdrive distortion, the whammy, and the phase. So the overdrive distortion is the same settings as it is for the verse, mostly distortion, bit of overdrive in there to kind of really balance it out. The whammy is doing that verse trick again, where I'm turning on the detune setting but taking all the velocity out of it, just to add a bit more spread. And then the phase 90 pedal is just in there as normal on the slowest rate possible, just changing that sound up at the end. Previously it was just my overdrive distortion and a phase 90 pedal going on there, which sounded fantastic, had that nice rise and fall, worked really well with the kind of the rest of the sound going on, and the overdrive distortion is a good solid sound for a chorus. I had a bit of an issue by using the same pedal for a verse and a chorus, so it never really brilliantly sat well with me. I'm more okay with using it again in the same situation, but because I'm able to bulk that up, kind of reinforce it with that blues driver pedal, which doesn't have anywhere near as much drive and punch, but it offers something else. It's a bit more of a rounded out, flatter sound in a good way. And kind of putting them together works really, really well for that. The main distortion pedal for the chorus for this is still the overdrive distortion, but that nice, gentle, kind of creamy kind of distortion sound from the blues pedal really does help to kind of add a nice kind of dynamic to it. The other two pedals, the whammy and the phase, add so much more to the kind of overall texture, and I really like this sound overall. So here's what it sounds like. You can hear on that one side that kind of nice, flat, solid sound from the blues pedal, but then you can hear that modulated sound from the overdrive distortion, and it really works really fantastically well to kind of smash these two sounds together. Because they're taking the same signal, everything's in sequence because it's the same signal, but having the ability to change up those sounds worked wonders to really broaden out this chorus. As I've said with the chorus for this and in many other songs that Muse have, this element of the song, this part of the song, is not doing anything to grab your attention. It's just supporting the rhythm. It's just there to keep the song going. And this approach, to my mind, this approach for the effects that I've added here, does really well to support that idea. I mean, in my head, it's absolutely nothing like what Matt's using live because I don't have any of that gear, but for me, it's a fantastic approximation about what really works for the sound in general, at least in the studio version. I think it sounds quite good live and would work really well live. I'm really proud of this sound, and I'm really enjoying being able to use this detune setting on the whammy to really add an extra layer to my sounds overall. So that's the chorus overall, and it's the same settings that's used every time that the chorus is used. So we're now going to look at the solo for Stockholm Syndrome. So the main bulk of the sound is, again, going back over to the prime distortion and the big muff and putting them together. Same deal, nice gritty tone from the big muff and solid, current, crisp distortion from the prime distortion. What's being added are two things, phase 90 and the detune whammy trick. In terms of kind of where they are, we're taking the signal, splitting it. The left-hand side is getting the big muff and then the whammy with that detune trick. On the other side is the prime distortion and some phase 90. I've found through experimentation that it doesn't really matter where the whammy appears with that detune trick. As long as it's in there somewhere, it'll work. I mean, it might change up subtle things here and there, but the broad thing is that it doesn't do much to change. What might be helping to spread that sound out is to have the whammy on one side and then the phaser on the other, just to kind of add even more kind of distance, a bit more of a nicer stereo spread. Again, I'm still experimenting with it broadly, but that's the sort of approach that I might take, and so therefore I'll probably go back to the chorus, I might implement that somewhere. But that's the order of effects and the effects themselves that are kind of going on there. I won't kind of go into too much detail even more on it because the justification for the pedals being used is the same as the riff. The main difference is just adding in that phase 90 for that slow, nice modulation. One, to help the riff stand out even more and add some kind of different kind of dynamics that are going on in there. The whammy is just to spread that sound out even more, so there is a clear distinction between the riff tone and the solo tone. As I've said before, I really like to change up the characteristics of sounds with each section that goes on. Broadly, it doesn't really matter how small those sections are. If you're going to have a section that small or big or whatever, if you're going to have a distinctly different section throughout a song, whether it's a verse, a chorus, a mid-layer, a coda, a bridge, whatever, if it's in there and it's in the song, it deserves to have its own signature sound. And adding in these two additions of the detune trick and the phase 90 really goes a long way to take that riff tone and elevating it even more. So how about a demo? Here it is. So as you can see, it's very different tonally from the riff tone, but it's really gone a long way with just the addition of those other simple effects. It really shows that minor changes to a pedal board or just rigs in general can have a huge impact on your tone overall. You may not have to worry about trying to find the significant change in your distortion. Adding in a bit of modulation here and there can go potentially in an even longer way to having a real difference on your sound. Just something to really consider there. As I said before, I'm still broadly experimenting with the ESA overall, but Stockholm Syndrome was one of the few patches that I had an exact idea about how I wanted it to sound, because I kind of built up in my mind, the Big Muff is great for the riff, it just doesn't have the clarity. But so being able to combine them like that. The thing that has surprised me the most is this detune trick, and it's completely transformed how I'm considering the production of riffs in general using my rig, and it's really shown me a huge amount of new possibilities with my, I'll be honest, really simple rig to get an even more diverse range of sounds. And the contrast between the riff sound and the solo sound is just reinforcing that idea. So there it is. That's the solo sound overall. There is now one more sound. So we've now come to the outro of Stockholm Syndrome. So this is after the solo, after the final chorus, after the last build-up. We're now into that kind of half-time riff. Previously, I just used my prime distortion as far as I can remember, for the same reason I used it for the riff. Huge tone, clarity, works fantastic for riffs. So the sound I'm using here is still my overall riff sound with my prime distortion and the Big Muff. What I'm doing here is taking the whammy and putting that before the signal splits off into two, so that both sides of the chain have this harmony setting, and then putting that in there. That's the only addition, that's the only thing that's being changed. The advantage of that is that it now has even more of a low, grittier sound, because there's that lower octave in the harmony there. Now both pedals have a huge advantage when this happens. It adds a lot more kind of grit and dirt to it. The pedal that takes advantage of this the most is the Big Muff, because of the nature of the sounds that it gets. But the prime distortion does get a big boost from that because of the clarity it has. It helps kind of push that sound even more. Because I can change the order of effects within the ESA, I could have chosen either side to send it to. But after experimenting with it and the nature of this section of the song, you really want that kind of a bigger sound as possible. And the best way of achieving the bigger sound is putting the whammy in for both sounds. So that's what happens. So it takes the input of the guitar, whammy, splits off into two, Big Muff, prime distortion, job's done. And this is what it sounds like. So as you can tell from that, it's quite big. That sound is absolutely not subtle. It's I would say, the most brutalist sound that there is for the whole of Stockholm Syndrome that I've now got, which works really well because it's at the end of the song. You want a bigger sound as possible for the outro of Stockholm Syndrome. Yes, the riff is really important to nail and get a good tone for that, but because of the journey that the song takes, and also because the kind of the half-time nature that the outro riff takes, putting in as many frequencies that work is going to help you out in the long run, and that's what the whammy is good for, as a secret weapon for this song. And that's kind of it. That's all of Stockholm Syndrome for me as it stands for now. This video is kind of less of a sound-like video and more of a sound-like me for Stockholm Syndrome. But since having this Boss ESA in my rig, has really enabled me to broaden my sound and push my pedals even further than I had before. And that's what I really like about it. So there we have it, that's the remastered Stockholm Syndrome. I hope that was enjoyable and it made sense. I don't know if you could tell, but I've really enjoyed having the ability to now go stereo and really layer up these sounds. As I said before, I know this is not a sound that everyone can achieve, but it is something to aspire to. To be able to get a nice, deep, rich sound is something that all guitarists should really aspire for. No matter what gear they have, they can always strive for the next pedal, the next thing that they want to kind of complete their sound. When I started, before I went stereo, I didn't know it was going to be such a hugely beneficial thing to my sound. And I'm really glad I did. The only thing is that I wish I'd just done it sooner so I could just play with these sounds sooner. But now that I have a stereo sound, I'm really glad that I do, and I can't wait to make more sounds with it. But I'm really looking forward to doing more sound-like videos for this and helping you guys kind of sound as good as you can possibly get, or give you ideas about what the next bit of kit is that you want to get. But that's all way off in the future. In the meantime, I really hope that you enjoyed my remastered Stockholm Syndrome sound. Do let me know what songs you'd like me to do sound likes for. A number of these sound likes I'm going to redo because of the new stereo setup, and because I think that generally I could make them sound better anyway. But all that is to come in the future. There is plenty more content to come for the channel. All you've got to do is just wait and see what's coming up. And the best way to do that is hit that notification bell. I've been Harry, and thanks for watching.